Hello and welcome to this edition of The Interview here on France 24. I'm Robert Parsons. They've been billed as Putin's Games, the 2014 Winter Olympics in the Russian Black Sea resort of Sochi. And who would argue with that? The Russian president fought particularly hard for the Games to be held in Sochi. His name will be associated with them in a way unmatched by any other political leader in recent times. It's his chance to defy his mockers and demonstrate once and for all that Russia is more than oil, gas oligarchs and a dodgy record on human rights. He wants to astound and charm the world. But has he succeeded? And what sort of Russia is Vladimir Putin building? Well, joining me now to discuss those and other questions is Dmitry Trenin, director of the Moscow Center of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, a former research fellow at the NATO Defense College and a fellow at the Institute of Europe. He's a frequent and highly respected commentator on Russian and international affairs. Dmitry Trenin, thanks very much for being with us on France 24. This is really very personal for Vladimir Putin, isn't it? He's invested so much effort into these games. But what does he hope to achieve?
Well, I think he wants several things. First of all, he wants the Games to be part of his project for building the new Russian nation in a top-down fashion. Mr. Putin has inherited a post-Soviet polity within the Russian Federation. Now, his job, as he sees it, is to transform that polity into a new and modern nation. One way of doing that is through holding big events that are unifying, such as the Olympic Games.
But, you know, this was projected, of course, it's partly directed at the Russian people. It's also largely directed at the international community. He wanted to project this image of, as you said, a successful Russia. But given the criticism that he's been receiving on all kinds of issues, from security to corruption to human rights, is he succeeding?
Well, I would say so far he has succeeded more than a lot of people had believed he would. Back in 2007, it was not a given that Russia would be able to construct the infrastructure for the Games. It was not clear whether Russia would be able to assure an acceptable level of security around Sochi. And it's now a fact that you have the infrastructure in place, you have a new airport, you have the sports facilities. Yes, there are a few flaws that people point to. But overall, Mr. Putin has succeeded in so far. But clearly, terrorism and security remain a problem through the Games, and they will remain a problem when the Games are over.
But he's also succeeded in drawing attention, has he not? So one of the biggest criticisms of Russia and his administration, corruption. The fact that such an enormous amount of money has been spent on these Games.
Well, this is the way that Mr. Putin and the Russian establishment promote regional development policies. In order to build, let's say, in order to develop a region, be that Sochi, be that Vladivostok and the Far East in the run-up to the APEC summit back in 2012, you mobilize the resources of the country and you build actually more than the Olympics would need. You build for the region that would stay beyond the Olympics, like the new airport, like the new roads. It's not just for the Olympics; it's part of the project. Inevitably, in Russia, these things cost more than they would elsewhere. But a road in Sochi that costs several times more meter per meter than a road somewhere else in the world is no different from another road in Russia that is, again, built at a higher cost than abroad. And this is fine. This is the road is built, but it gives enough food for a very serious discussion within Russia. And frankly, people are discussing the levels of corruption in Russia, and this is something that that will not go away. But this is, believe me, it's not just about Mr. Putin and his friends. It's about the very way things are done still in that country.
Well, which leads me to another question. What is the Russian perception? We know what the international perception is. We've seen the often carping criticism, it has to be said. But within Russia, too, it does seem that people are a little lukewarm about these Olympic Games.
Well, I would say this. People everywhere are of two minds about the games of that kind. Some people would say, yeah, it's a good thing to have it. It's electrifying. It gives a boost to the national morale, what have you. And then there are other people who would say, you spend a certain amount of money on essentially prestige, and there are other things where you would rather put your money. Hospitals, schools, you name it. There are thousands of things that need to be done. Well, Russia, in that case, is not unique. It's just part of the global. It's part of the situation everywhere in the world.
Well, that's partially true, but except $51 billion has been spent on Sochi. Now, you say part of that's going to the infrastructure, and of course it is, but you also hinted that perhaps that money could have been better spent on other projects inside Russia, and maybe a lot of Russians see it that way as well, particularly as Sochi is relatively speaking, a small resort, and it's not at all clear that Russians will want to go there in the future.
Right. No, the point is well taken. I've just looked at some of the figures, and person per person, I think they're spending twice as much per athlete at these games than they were spending at some other games before, say the London Games. So yes, there is a certain margin. But let me tell you this, for the bulk of the Russian people, this is not the money that has been taken away from them in terms of taxes. Russia has a very low and flat taxation rate. So the money that the government spends is the money that Gazprom and Rosneft and other companies get for the oil and gas that they produce inside Russia. It's, in a way, the government spending the government's money. And that certainly mitigates any backlash against games spending.
Instead of the international triumph that I'm sure Mr. Putin must have hoped for, the games do rather seem to have emphasized the sourness, the growing sourness in the relationship between Russia and the West. No Barack Obama at the Games, no Angela Merkel, no François Hollande, no David Cameron.
Well, yes, but you have Mr. Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader. You have Shinzo Abe, the Japanese prime minister. You have a number of post-Soviet states represented at the highest level. This basically tells you a little bit about the shifting geopolitics of Russia's foreign policy. There is a rift between Russia and Europe. There is a rift between Russia and the United States. These rifts have grown wider and deeper in the last couple of years. This is a fact. I would say it's more serious than snubbing Mr. Putin. It's not only something that the Russians need to be thinking hard about, it's also something that the West needs to think a little bit harder about. Maybe we're doing something that is not in our common interest.
And there does seem to be a sense, I mean, I take your point, obviously the West needs to think about this relationship as well, but there does seem to be a sort of an element of sneering at European values these days, which is rather new from Vladimir Putin. He's emphasizing in place something rather different, Russian conservatism, Russian traditionalism. But is that the image of Russia that young, educated Russians want?
Well, Russia is a big place, and you have a wide range of opinions on all issues. You have different cultures, I wouldn't say at war with each other in Russia, but certainly competing in Russia. So, for example, in January, you had something like 400,000 people visiting Finland just for the Christmas/New Year holidays from Russia. And at the same time, you had a similar number of people who flocked to see the gifts of the Magi at the Our Savior Cathedral in Moscow, where the Pussy Riot once held their thing. So you have two Russias, one that, for Christmas goes, to have good time abroad, and you have another Russia that can stand for hours, 5, 6, 7, 9 hours in freezing cold just to see, the relics of Christianity. It's more serious than simply Putin versus it's deeper than simply Putin versus the younger, let's say, educated worldly public.
Okay, very briefly, Dmitry, because we're running out of time. Hovering in the background of these games, of course, is another problem between the West and Russia, and that's Ukraine. Once these games are over, I imagine that the clash between Russia and the West over the Ukraine will be renewed.
Well, I wouldn't call it a clash. I think that we are in the situation in which Ukraine has become unstable and can get even more unstable. This is not something that either Russia or the European Union should be very happy about. An unstable Ukraine is a threat. And it's time for Russia and the European Union to look at that from that angle and do something together so that Ukraine keeps itself in one piece and is brought back to be at peace with itself.
Dmitry Trenin, thanks very much for being with us today on France 24. That's all we have time for today on the interview, I'm afraid, but do stay with us. More news and headlines to follow.